If you're lucky enough to know that you're neurodivergent, the chances are really high that you have people in your family that are also neurodivergent and they don't know it. We have an epidemic of elders who aren't aware of their sensitive nervous system threat response, their sensory overwhelm. They don't understand their meltdowns and shutdowns. They don't have accommodations, support, community, medication, or therapies. How many people could that be? Well, there's 75.4 million boomers on the planet and 65.2 million Gen Xers. How many people are neurodivergent? We don't know. The estimates range from 1% to about 44% of the population. And the reason that it ranges so much is because not everyone agrees about the definition of neurodivergent. If we split that in the middle and we just said 20% of the boomers and the Gen Xers are neurodivergent. A very conservative estimate of how many unrecognized neurodivergent elders we have out there: 28,140,000 neurodivergent people over 40, only 1% are recognized. Neurodivergent is an umbrella term that means having a different brain, spine, sensory organs, having a different nervous system than the typical population, the neurotypical population. We inherit neurodivergent nervous systems from neurodivergent ancestors. Over the past 15 years, there's been an increase in diagnoses among young people. For some people, that has felt like neurodivergence is new. Evidence points that it's as old as humanity. 20% of all populations throughout human history have probably been neurodivergent. The slew of autism, ADHD, Tourette's, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia diagnoses are because the DSM has changed and because healthcare around neurodiversity has improved. It has a long way to go. So what we can deduct is that all of the neurodivergent children and young adults that have been fortunate enough to have official diagnosis have neurodivergent relatives, parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles and cousins that are also neurodivergent. These are our elders. These are the people who've made it into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, made it to their old age by intuitively creating a life that works for their neurodivergent brain. It would be really wrong of us to assume that our community is going to be a benefit to them, but they're not going to be a benefit to us. Because frankly, the boomers and the older Gen Xers who have survived beyond 50, those people have some bomb-ass coping mechanisms. They have figured out, without community help or medication, how to live on this planet. In the arts, I saw so many elders who were great role models for me. They taught me things about neurodivergent self-care. They taught me things about living this life, being this sensitive. I met most of them through theater, but I met some through education, other teachers, and I definitely had some neurodivergent professors. There are all kinds of incredible neurodivergent mentors who could be teaching us how they made it this far. How did they support themselves? How did they raise children and move through burnout, through meltdowns, through shutdowns? How did they make it? They have a ton to offer us. They have figured out so many amazing ways of being here. We need them to help us, and they need us to recognize them. How do you know if you have an unrecognized neurodivergent elder in your life? The trouble is that you might not see neurodivergent traits because they've been alive so long and adapting so long in an environment not built for them. What you might see are things like masking fatigue, mental health issues, being really, really controlling, career failure, hoarding, religious fervor. You might see things that don't look at all like neurodivergence in very young children. You might see signs of suffering and not know it's neurodivergent suffering, or you might not see signs of suffering at all. If someone happens to have figured out a lifestyle that works for them intuitively and they're thriving and succeeding and they have relationships, people like that are really unlikely to ever get recognized by the medical community. The neurodivergent experience varies greatly, we know that, and it really varies for our elders. What should we look for if we suspect neurodivergence in our family elders? Look for social issues, like they have few friends and they're really isolated. There are going to be signs of family estrangement. They'll be underemployed, inconsistently employed, or a lifetime of self-employment. Their career history is probably not going to match their level of talent, intelligence, and potential. For some reason, they won't have performed at the level you would expect from somebody as awesome as they are. Look for addiction, disordered eating, depression, and mental breakdowns. We know that neurodivergent people are attracted to their neurokin, and we find each other a lot of times in alt communities and self-help communities. So for Gen Xers, I personally have found a lot of neurodivergent people in communities like witches, rockabilly, retro, pinup, burlesque, drag, wellness, yoga, Dungeons and Dragons, Renfest, cosplay, stuff like that. Boomers, I think, find each other in church, the military, AA, Al-Anon, Buddhism groups, mindfulness groups, yoga, health food kind of wellness community, as well as inside of their political party or groups like Weight Watchers and book clubs. All neurodivergent people will have hyperfixations and special interests. So look for elders that are really into hobbies like classic cars. Sometimes they're into their hobby to an extent of like competing in it professionally. So like barbecue, baking, gingerbread houses, dog shows, competition level hobbies. Collections will be common. They have model trains, baseball cards. Favorite movies and bands will be on repeat. Look for sensory issues. So only eating certain foods, sometimes despite doctors' orders to change their diet. They're going to have strong reactions to smells, sounds, tastes, and temperatures. They're going to really, really like stuff or really, really dislike stuff. They need to be in control of their environment, their food, and their schedule. They'll feel upset in spaces that they can't control, like the grocery store, driving on the road, restaurants, shopping, at family members' houses. They don't like getting upset. Nobody likes to be dysregulated. So people will have protection in place to keep from getting dysregulated, and that's going to look like being inflexible. Rules, rules, rules. They either have a ton of rules or they don't want any rules to apply to them at all. Look for a rigid schedule, disliking change, and liking tradition and predictability. There'll be some life issues like getting lost, losing things, clipping corners, dropping things, forgetful, sometimes an uncoordinated walk or a bad posture, and incontinence. Executive functioning adulting tasks can go one of two ways with elders. I've noticed that it can look like living in a big mess, like a squirrel nest bed, doom piles on the desks and dressers, unopened mails, late taxes, unpaid bills, and it in its biggest form, it may look like hoarding. But the pendulum can swing the other way. And just how you can have neurodivergent people who are timeline and often very late, you have neurodivergent people who are so filled with shame and guilt that they are always early. If you have a neurodivergent person living in a squirrel's nest, you can also have neurodivergent people who live in incredibly clean homes. We're talking extreme tidiness, rigid organization, lots of house rules, perfect taxes and bills and credit scores. They have masking fatigue. Masking is when we pretend to be neurotypical in order to pass in social situations. It is exhausting. It is useful, but it can be very deeply damaging. Their social battery runs out and they need to go take a nap. They may fall asleep right in the middle of the living room with everyone around them if stuff gets too much. If things get too loud, this person will just honk out. They need to know plans in advance. They need to know who's coming. They want to know how to dress. They need to be able to work out the social expectation before the social event. They have like catchphrases or stories that they tell a lot. They know that those are acceptable things to say. Those are scripts. That's what neurodivergent scripting looks like. Neurodivergent elders are kind of feast or famine people. Like, they're around you and they give you 100% of their love and attention, and they are so amazing, or they're not there at all. That's what you get when somebody is really masking and fawning. They are being super sweet and super available when they have the energy to do that. But when they don't have the energy to play that role, they can't be around people at all. They have to retreat. They can't give people some of their energy and attention and conserve some. They're an all or nothing type of grandparent or parent. Like all neurodivergent people, our neurodivergent elders will have overactive nervous system threat response. They get dysregulated, they feel upset, and they go into the 5 Fs. So that's fight, flight, freeze or flop, and fawn. Fight is going to look like negative talk, arguing, irritability, flashes of anger, controlling behavior, or actual fighting. Flight is going to look more like social anxiety, acting afraid, pacing, restless, running away, disappearing, or using chemicals to mood alter or drift away mentally. Freeze or flop can look like somebody who's giving you the cold shoulder or the silent treatment. They're hiding, they're falling asleep, they're getting physically sick, ignoring people, or just shutting down, right? Fawn is going to look like people pleasing, hiding their pain or their negative emotions, performing their positive emotions, feeling like they need to entertain people, praising people, pushing through illness or exhaustion. The number one sign that you have an unsupported, unrecognized neurodivergent elder in your life is that they are triggered by neurodivergent people, particularly children and young people who are getting to behave in ways that expose their neurodivergent traits. Traits that our elders were never allowed to express. When they see us and our children authentically, lovingly enjoying our neurotypes, they feel jealous, afraid, they feel really vulnerable and angry. It isn't comfortable for a masking neurodivergent person to be around unmasked neurodivergent people. There needs to be some sort of primer for telling boomers that they are neurodivergent. And I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent until I was 42. I'm now 44. So that made me wonder how many neurodivergent people of my generation are out there. There's all these people under 40 who are neurodivergent and know it. Those identified people have neurodivergent ancestors. We have neurodivergent elders alive today in the Gen X and Boomer generations. I actually don't think it's right for all of us to be medically diagnosed. My point, though, is that it's very helpful for us to be recognized. Whether it's self-recognition or medical recognition, recognition gives us access to understanding what's going on, our sensory overload, our nervous system threat response, our meltdowns, our shutdowns, our triggers. We are able to connect with our community, access accommodations. We are able to have the right therapy for our neurotype, the right lifestyle for our neurotype. We're able to understand that we're not broken neurotypicals. We're perfectly normal, healthy, neurodivergent people. Not being recognized hurts us and causes suffering. 2 generations of suffering elders have their amygdalas hijacked. They're in constant crisis mode, and they can't help the younger generations cope with things like recovering from this pandemic or recovering from climate disaster. We need regulated elders, especially the sensitive, incredibly intelligent, creative population that is our neurodivergent elders.